whole hospital thing is kind of striking, because for a label which is actually functioning in the drum and bass arena, it's pretty open, and openness is not naturally associated with drum and bass these days. So how do you get away with it?
We started Hospital, I mean, it's like every label that I've ever been involved with. I've always had my own labels simply because no one else would ever release my music. And
what do you mean with always?
I started my first label in 1988. It was called Pig and Trumpet. And again, it was, you know, I was writing music, I was recording music. I was too impatient to send demos to people and just wait around. And I became very paranoid because people were telling me you cannot trust the majors. And also I just thought, well, just fuck it, let's just get on with it, let's do it ourselves. You know, press up 500 7-inches, drive around in my old car, go to shops and see if anyone will buy it. And I didn't know what I was doing at all. I had no idea about business. For me, it was just, this is the music and I want to get it to people, so this is how we do. And originally the first 7-inch that we pressed up was simply to try and get a gig for the band, because we thought that if we pretend that we've got a record deal and we go into a club in London and we give them this record and say, hey, we've got a record out, that they'll actually give us a gig instead of charging us to play, because that's what it's like in London. You have to pay 50 quid if you're unknown, just for the honour of playing in someone's club. So this was simply like, maybe we can play for nothing instead of having to pay. So we pressed up this record, and it was a cover version of a rare groove tune called Stories, which was recorded in 1971 by a band called the Chaka Chaz. They were kind of one-hit wonder on the rare groove tip. So we did this, and it became quite successful. I think probably because we weren't trying to actually make a record. We were just trying to have something to prove to people that we existed. And the record itself took off, and it went top 40 in the end. For me, that was really where I got the bug, because it was so exciting to have your own record on your own label, and people want it. You know, it's in demand. And the whole kind of cottage industry thing, which is where you've put all your money into pressing up 500 7-inch records. Maybe it cost about £200 or something, but that was everything that we had. And from there, you know, people bought it, and they said, why don't you do a 12-inch mix? So we did a 12-inch edit, and we sold 1,000 of those, and then we repressed it, and we sold another 1,000. And this was in the days when, it was in 1988, and people didn't...
How old were you by then? Because, I mean, nowadays people seem to feel kind of minor if they don't have a label by the age of 21 or something.
I know, it's a bit like owning a pair of trainers now. You know, you have your kind of pit bull terrier, you have your label, and you have the latest kind of trainers. But I mean, then it was a little bit different. There were a few independent labels, but the whole kind of structure, the whole infrastructure wasn't really there. It was just about setting up. You know, the whole DIY ethos was really getting started around that time.
DIY meaning? Do it yourself.
You know, and yeah, at that time, I wasn't young, I wasn't a spring chicken, I was actually 27 in 1988.
What you been doing up until then?
I'd been just making music and trying to find, I don't know, I was really unfocused, I was really aimless, and I made a lot of music. A lot of it was pretty terrible, but I knew that it was what I always wanted to do. So for me, it was just like, this was the first time I'd actually had the confidence to release something and bring it to people. You know, I remember like, with the very first release, going into nightclubs, and just like, to get into the clubs for free, I had to give the record to the bouncer on the door, and I'd go in and go up to DJs and give them the record and just be a pain in the arse, you know, and that's one of the big lessons that I learnt then, is that you really have to be a pain in the arse sometimes. Didn't come easy.
But how does that get together with being a nice bloke? I mean...
Well, that's kind of hard when you're running a label, because you put a lot of love into it, and you're doing it for the love of music. And I think most of the artists that I've worked with hopefully would say that they feel some love for me. And that's more important than anything else at the end of the day, because I've made mistakes in the past where, you know, I've fallen out with people for the wrong reasons, and I totally regret that, because now I can look back on those situations and think, well, for me the most important thing is it's all about spreading the love. And that sounds like a little bit of a cliche, but at the end of the day, it's one thing making music, but it's quite another thing when you're in a position of responsibility, helping other people to make music. And the emotion behind it all is the most important factor. You know, that is more important than how much money you make out of the music. It's more important than how many people listen to your music. It's how you feel emotionally throughout the whole process. And that includes making the music, and that includes how the people listening to your music feel about your music. So at the end of the day, being a nice bloke has nothing to do with it. It's about, it's the feeling that you put into it. Yeah, my band around that time was a kind of acid jazz band, which at the time was quite a cool thing to be involved in, but it's a dirty word now. So I don't really know why, but it's just become a little bit, oh yeah, I used to be in an acid jazz band. It's like a few years ago, it was a crime to admit that you used to like heavy metal, but now it's cool to admit that you used to like heavy metal. But it's still not cool to admit that you used to make acid jazz.
So is it already cool to admit that you've been remixed by Paul Oakenfold?
Yeah, that's all right. I don't mind that one.
Okay, but probably for those who...
That was when he was good, by the way.
How did you keep focus? Whereas, I mean, you obviously saw a lot of people going down a lot of different routes. How did you keep your own focus in, you know, not making too many pacts with the devil?
It's kind of... it's chaos theory, really. I mean, I'm 42 years old now, and the time's just gone. It's gone like that really, really quickly. And like, I'm making drum and bass, and I suddenly find myself sort of in charge of one of the biggest drum and bass labels, and it was never intended to be that way. It's just kind of happened, really. I mean, when I was in my acid jazz band, I kept writing music that was fast, and like the band were going, no, we only play down tempo or mid tempo. And I was writing all these tunes like 140, 150 BPM, and I had no idea what to do with them. I was living in Tottenham, and some of my mates in Tottenham were like people like Shut Up and Dance, and they were making kind of like very early breakbeat and early kind of rave music and hardcore. I really wanted to do it. I was feeling it, but you know, I was on the road with my bands. We were playing around sort of around Japan and around Europe, and it was really, I had to split the band up and dissolve it before I could give myself the time and space to actually get into the studio and start making this music that I was feeling. And the experience that really set me on the road was listening to Goldie's album Timeless. That really took me from wanting to do this to knowing that I needed to do it. So, and that to me, that still remains the finest drum and bass artist album to this day. It's, yeah, there was never any intention to do this, but I find myself here, and it's been it's just been a long process, and you have no real control over your destiny. It just kind of happens to you, and all you've got to do is just turn up, work really hard, and be open-minded. And there are times when you just got to go with the flow. You know, you just have to go with the little lucky breaks that you get. You just got to dive in there and take advantage of them.
So, what lucky break did get you into this strict inner circle, big boys club?
Okay, it's not a strict inner circle. I've got to say that's complete bollocks. Right? People have this idea of drum and bass and jungle that it's kind of like that it's run by about 4 people who are all in London, and you know, and they're not interested in anybody else outside of their circle. I've got to say that is totally untrue. On Hospital, I think we have about 12 artists that are signed to the label, and one of those artists comes from London, and that's me. And everybody else comes from either different parts of the UK or different parts of the world. And at the moment, the most exciting place for drum and bass is Eastern Europe. A couple of years ago, it was Brazil, and that's going to change. There's people in different parts of the world who are making drum and bass and jungle. And the important thing is that people have learnt the skills, they've learnt the techniques, but now, importantly, they're bringing their own sense of excitement through in the music, with their own ingredients and their own lack of prejudice in their music as well. So it's a truly global form.
What you mean with lack of prejudice?
A lot of people who make drum and bass in the UK are fixated on a certain type of structure, and this isn't unique to drum and bass. This applies to every form of dance music in many ways. People who produce house, people who produce trance, people who produce hip hop, If they're busy DJing in certain clubs, they get fixated on a certain structure, and it's very, very important to step outside of that, which is why when we get people making music from a different part of the world who they haven't got those kind of structural prejudices. In other words, it's that thing where you have 64 bars of a drum intro, then you have a breakdown, and then you have the main body, it's maybe 128 bars long, and then there's another breakdown, and then there's the mix-out point, and then there's the outro. That's boring. So that's why from different parts of the world people have different ideas of structure and different ideas of using different chord sequences or just breaking the rules, which is what it's all about. I'm always searching for something that surprises me, searching for something that I wouldn't predict or I wouldn't expect in the music, because then that excites me and I know that I can get behind it. If it sounds really competent and very well engineered and very well produced, but it sounds like something I've heard before, it goes in the bin. It's as simple as that. So it has to have something unique about it.
So you're looking for these own personal mistakes, which then turn into own style.
Yeah, totally. Totally. It's all about those little mistakes that you then turn into a lump of gold. You know, making tunes is alchemy. It really is. Your fuck-ups are your biggest fucking asset. This is some Norwegians making absolutely crazy drum and bass.
You're talking about ignorance in crowds, and being the ignorant twat I am, I was kind of surprised to see something like be in a record store and it's like, what's this futuristic thing? What are the grimy strings? Hey, that's rather something for me than for the drum and bass crowd. What's going on there? How do you get away with, you know, these sort of things, and how did they come on your label in the first place?
We've always released other things apart from drum and bass on Hospital, and I think that's really to keep in touch with reality and not get carried away. And it feeds back into the drum and bass that we do. We've got two main artists called Landslide and the Futuristics, and Jay played some of their stuff in his chat. So I'm not actually going to play any of that material, but it's basically, we've got an open mind about Hospital. We happen to be mainly drum and bass at the moment. That doesn't mean that we're always going to be a drum and bass label at all.
But being or having an open mind is one thing, and it's fine and it looks good on a calendar and if you put it on a wall. Yeah. But when you have a label and you want to have some sort of an identity that people, how do you get to that point that people will get to your stuff and grab it no matter what?
It can be a struggle, because the thing is, because people know us as a drum and bass thing, it's like in shops, whatever we release, it tends to get racked in the drum and bass section, which can be annoying for Landslide and for the Futuristics and for us. So it's a constant battle for us to kind of educate the shops as well. It's more about the people in the stores than the actual people who buy the music, because, you know, if you hear a tune on the radio or on the internet or whatever, then you're going to seek it out if you like it. The way I feel about downloading music is I believe that what goes around comes around, and I'm a great believer in karma.
So you're a real big fan of this recent thing where they ask people to send back all the MP3s they ever downloaded back to the majors?
Yeah, you told me about that. That sounds funny. Yeah,
so will you be happy when you get a lot of your MP3s in your mail inbox then?
No, that'd be a pain in the arse. It's basically all I feel that is each and every one of us here is involved in producing music or bringing music to people in some way, whether that's performing or administrating or whatever. And if you want to make a living out of making music, then you need to think about what you're doing when you're downloading someone's tune without asking them. If you don't want to make a living out of it and you're not interested in that, then you don't really need to think about it, because you don't have a responsibility. But if you are hoping to have some kind of a career and some kind of financial reward for what you're doing, then you're already in a position of responsibility right now. That's all I'm saying about that.
And where does the whole live thing come into this? Because obviously there's like you see a lot more gigs these days, and what's your experience? I mean, you've been on the tour for what now?
We've been on the road with the live band since May, and the exciting thing about live music right now in the UK, like club attendances have been really dropping across all genres of music. Sales of CDs and sales of vinyl have been dropping. The whole thing's in crisis, but live music ticket sales have been increasing. And 2002 people sold more tickets to live events than ever before in history. And I think there's a general awareness in the world now that, yeah, we're not that excited about DJs anymore because almost everybody can DJ to some extent. And the whole kind of thing about iconizing a DJ and putting them up there like a god, that's all going now, thank God. I feel extremely lucky to be able to go to the other side of the world and get paid good money to play for 2 hours. And part of me always feels like I can't really work out why this is happening. Why on earth is someone paying me to do this when there's bound to be about 30 better DJs in that town and on the other side of the world who are technically better than me and a lot hungrier. So I think a lot of people are realising that, and they're starting to think, right, we actually want to see people play live again. We want to see people play the music live. We want to see them give me something unique. So anyway, that's where my head was at the beginning of this year. So we put the band together, and we've been playing drum and bass completely live, with no playback and no click track and no computers, no sequencing, just 100% in-your-face liveness. It's very exciting, and it's a lot of fun to do as well.
But as exciting as it is, isn't that one form of a big backlash against the whole DIY ethos? Someone like your man SKC, would he be able to pull that off live?
Well, if he wanted to, I mean, if he was hungry to do it, and if he made that his objective, then he could do it.
But wasn't part of the beauty of why a lot of the exciting music in the last 20 years came around that you actually did not really have to be a trained musician or something and could just have like a bunch of crazy ideas and throw them in and look.
Yeah, totally. But then, like, there's no difference between sitting in your bedroom making a tune to being in a garage with 3 mates in a band making a tune. There's no real difference. It involves more people and it involves a lot more pain if you're doing it live. I just want to kind of do a little nerdy bit here because the way we transferred some of the samples over from the studio to live was a real challenge because a lot of the tunes, the way I make some of my tunes is a little bit like house producers when they use a filtered disco loop or whatever. You know, you'll take a two-bar loop of an orchestra or a funk band or whatever and you filter it in the studio so you get that real kind of rich kind of sound. And during the track, it'll kind of wah, 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 wah. It'll open up as you open up the filter, and that's how you get that kind of rush on the dance floor. So we do that in our drum and bass quite a bit, and that was a real issue. How do we do that live? Because we want to be totally independent of any time live. We want to be able to speed up and slow down. And basically, we just recycled everything. Now, Recycle is a little piece of software. I'm sure some of you have used it. Maybe some of you haven't used it. It's a little piece of software that's really easy to use. And it just chops a loop up into, say, if it's a bar long, you can chop it up into 16 parts. So you get 16 little slices, which means that you can play that sample really fast or really slow. And as long as you don't go too extreme, it's gonna sit well in the groove. So what we did is we recycled stuff and we just mapped it out over a keyboard. So you've got this one loop, say sort of like dun 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 dun, if that's the loop. You sliced it up into slices. You've got each slice on each little key like that, which means that if you want to slow the tune down, you know, you slow it down to half tempo and you're just going dun 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 dun. The keyboard doesn't represent like C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E. It's just trigger points. But it means that you can take like a musical sample that you've got and you can. You know, if the crowd's up there at the front and they're really going crazy, you naturally want to speed up when you're playing. That's the way it works with the band. So it means that we can all do that, even though we're playing all these samples. So that was kind of how we got away from being like harnessed to the original tempo of the recording. I'm going to deconstruct the tune called $1 Billion Gravy that was the title track on my album. It was made in Reason, and I wrote it on the road, which is like. The best thing about Reason is that it takes up very little CPU power, so you can have it on your laptop. My laptop is a G3, it's an old one. It's not very powerful, but I made the entire tune within it, kind of on aeroplanes and in hotels. And I have slagged off Reason in the past, a lot of people do, because it does have something funny in it that it compromises your sound. It's got some kind of weird data compression. I'm not quite sure how it works, but it can be a little bit hard to get a really, really good sound with Reason, but at the end of the day, it's extremely creative, it's quick to use, and the people who wrote it are geniuses, I believe. It's a phenomenal piece of software.